Hello and welcome to this tutorial on creating graphical user interfaces with Python. We're going to be using tkinter today as that comes standard with all Python installations. And for our example today, we are going to create a Dungeons & Dragons dice rolling simulator. Just in case you don't have your 4, 6, 8, and 20-sided dice with you, you could use this program instead. So I'm using Eclipse as my IDE, and all I've done is created a new Python module. I used the class template and I've named it D&D Dice. And so the first thing I'm going to do is change the name of my class as it comes as a default and make it a little bit more appropriate to our project today. So I'm going to call it D&D Dice. And I'm going to change remember these are the document strings, I'm going to change those document strings to something more appropriate so that when people view these, it gives them some useful information. So I'll say this class simulates rolling dice with varying numbers of sides. Okay? And before we get started really doing things, we have to import some things. We have to tell Python we're going to be using tkinter. And normally what you do is you would just type in import tkinter, but then you'd have to preface everything with tkinter, which is normally okay. But for this one module only, the convention is you can import everything with a statement like this. So from tkinter import star. And that imports the whole module, which means you do not have to preface it, which again goes against the normal convention, but it's standard policy that it's okay for this module. And then the other thing we're going to import from tkinter is a specific module called TTK. And TTK is a new group of themed widgets. And what that means is when you create a button using this in Windows, it looks like a Windows button. If you do it on a Mac, it looks like a Mac button. If you just use the standard buttons that come with tkinter, they don't look as nice. And then finally, since we are using a dice class, we need to import the random module so that we can create random numbers. Okay, so let's go down to our constructor method, which is down here. And we're going to add one parameter here. Remember, all methods in a class have to start with self as their first parameter. But we're going to add one more, and that's parent. And that's going to end up being our parent window, our main window. We'll get back to that in a second. Let's just add a quick doc string here, and I would urge you to expand upon this later. Creates all the buttons and labels. Alright, now before we come back and actually start building things, we're going to do one thing that's kind of outside our class. And we're going to set this up so that it runs as soon as it's opened. And we're going to do that with our if name equals main that we've seen before in the past. And again, by setting up this statement, this only runs, this part we're going to put in only runs if it's the program being run. If it's imported, the pieces under here will not run. So we're going to start out by making a new window. And the way you do that is you create root, and again we could call this anything. We could call it window or my window, but again by convention it's called root, and then equals tk, and tk is a main window, and you can see by the description that pops up it's a top level window. So that's one of the first things you have to create. Now we're going to create an instance of our class, and I'm going to call it dice. Again, I could call it anything we wanted to, but I'm going to create a new instance of our D&D dice class, and I'm going to pass it one parameter, which is our root window. And then finally, one other command that you have to have in all tkinter programs is you have to run the main loop, and that tells us to go ahead and get started. Alright? So when this program runs, it's going to create a new window. It's going to create an instance of the dice, of the D&D dice class, and pass it the parameter of root, and then it's going to run that main loop. So now let's go ahead and start building in our constructor our actual user interface. The first thing we're going to do is to kind of give our window a title. And since parent is the name, the variable that we've given to this, we're going to create parent, title, and I'm going to call it D&D Dice Roller. And then one other thing we're going to do is we're going to create the size of the window. And the way you do that is by using the command geometry. and then I just type, I'm going to do it 250 pixels by 200. And as we go, we might find out that that's not enough. We can always go back and change this later. So what we've done is we've created a bare bones window. So I've just saved it with the Control S, and let's see how this looks so far. Okay, I'm going to hit Control 11 to run it. I'm going to choose Python Run, and I'm going to run it. And there we go. We have a very basic window. We have an X button, maximize and minimize. So let's go ahead and close this and start to add some functionality to it. Before I do anything, I'm going to add, we have a main window, but I'm going to add a frame so that I can put all the other widgets in. So I'm going to create self, and I'm going to call it main frame. Again, you can call it whatever you want, but don't forget the self since it's a member of a class. And it's going to be a themed frame. And a frame takes at least one parameter, and it's what window it goes in. So I'm going to say it's going to go in the parent window, the root window. Whenever you create a widget with tkinter, it takes two commands. One is you actually create it, and the other part is you actually tell tkinter to actually put it on the screen. So the way you do that is with a geometry manager, and there's three different types, two of which are more popular. One is pack, and the other one is grid. We're going to use grid because it's a little bit more flexible. And I'm going to say self mainframe grid, and that actually tells Python to post that frame and put it in our window. Now if we ran this, we wouldn't see anything because frames are inherently blank. So let's make a button to put in that frame. So I'm going to create a button. I'll call it four-sided. We'll start with a four-sided die, and it's going to equal PTK because it's themed, and button. And buttons take several parameters. The first one has to be the frame that it's in, or the window that it's in. So we're going to put it in self.mainframe. And then we're going to give it some text. And the text will be what's written on the button. And we'll call it four-sided. Okay? And remember, since it's a widget, we have to not only create it, we have to grid it. So we're going to do self, four-sided, and then grid. And this time we're going to put some parameters in. We're going to tell it where to go. So we're going to put it in, and the way you do that with grid is you do it by row and column. So we're going to say the row equals 0, and the column equals 0. And everything else will be placed relative to that. That'll be the first row and column. Alright? So now we've made it, we've gridded it, I've saved it. Let's Control 11 to see how it looks. And there we go. We've got a nice four-sided button that when we click on, does absolutely nothing. So what we need now is to add some functionality to that button. So let's do that. What we need first is a place to, when we actually roll the dice, a place to put the result. So we're going to create what's called a label. And a label is a place to put text. So we're going to call it self, and then for result, for the result of the roll. And we are going to make it a label. We are going to, first parameter has to be the window or the frame where it is, so it's in the main frame. And we're going to do one other thing. We're going to create a text variable. Putting a text variable in here allows it to be updated so it doesn't stay the same all the time. If we had just put text equals, then that text would stay the same and it would never change. By putting a text variable, we can continually update that. And we'll call it self.four-side. Okay. Now what we have to do is up above our in our constructor class is actually create that variable here. So self.four-side is a string variable, and what that does, that tells Python to make a string variable that we can then update our label with. All right. Once we've created that result, remember we've created it. Now we have to grid it, and we are going to put it in the same row as our four-sided button, but we're going to put it one column over, so our column is going to be 1 so that it's next to it. So now we have a button, we have a label for the result, but now we have to find a way to make something happen when we push that button. So we need to actually create another method to do that, and we'll call it forRoll. And again, we'll have the first parameter self, and this method should be nothing new to you. We're going to just basically create a variable, and we're going to do a random roll. So random.randint, and since it's a four-sided die, we'll make it between 1 and 4. Now what we're going to do is we are going to, part of our method is whenever that's rolled, it's going to update our text variable that we put up here. Okay, so right up here. So we're going to do self, and then four-side, which is the name of our text variable. We're going to use the command set, and the value is going to be whatever the roll was up here for 4. Okay? So for this variable, set it to whatever this forRoll turns out to be. Almost done. The last thing we have to do is actually tell our button that when it's clicked to go ahead and call that method. So we have to add one more thing to our button. We're going to put a comma in. We're going to say command equals self.forRoll. And in this case, we're not going to put the parentheses like we normally do. We're going to leave the parentheses without, and we'll talk about why in another tutorial. Okay, so let's go ahead and save it. So we'll Control S to save. Let's do Control F11. Now we've got our four-sided button. If I click it, if I keep clicking it, we get random numbers. Okay. So now we've got a functioning four-sided die simulator. But notice that it is kind of squished up all on the right side, on the left side here. So let's do one more thing to fix that. If you've ever done anything with HTML, you know that you can put in padding around things. You can do the same thing in tkinter. And you can pad in the X direction, and you can pad in the Y direction. So I'm going to pad in the X direction, which is the horizontal direction, which is going to put some space between the button and the label. So let's just start it out with 10 pixels for right now. And again, notice I'm doing that in the grid area. The grid configures the widget. I'm going to add the same thing to the label, which will give it some space. I'm going to put a pad X equals 10 when I grid the label as well. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's run it again. And now notice that I actually have some space here between the button and the side. And now I have a lot more space between the button and the label text. So that looks a little bit nicer. Well, that's pretty much it for this part of it. All the rest is just doing the same thing for 6-sided, 8-sided, 10-sided, etc. sided dice. So your next challenge is to go ahead and implement that and finish off this program. Don't forget to put in document strings for each of your methods. Thank you for paying attention.